Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. Wow, this was a really, really exciting interview you have coming your way with Niyc Pidgeon is her name. She is the author of a book called Now is Your Chance, a 30-day guide to living your happiest life using positive psychology. And she also has an amazing podcast called Unstoppable Success with Niyc Pidgeon, and that's spelled Niyc Pidgeon. And our conversation was not what I thought it was going to be. I thought we were going to be talking about productivity and, positive psychology because she's an expert in positive psychology. And we ended up talking about the fact that she's writing her next book, which comes out in 2023, and it's about suicide prevention. And this got so deep so fast, but I am so energized by our conversation. So I really hope that you enjoy my interview with Niyc Pidgeon as much as I enjoyed spending time with her. I am so excited to welcome Niyc Pidgeon to the Terri Cole Show. Welcome, Niyc.
Thank you for having me. I am so thrilled to be here together.
Wow, we have so many things in common, my sister, about what we're doing in the world. And I'm so very interested and into the work that you've already put out there. But I want to start, because before we started recording, you and I were sort of talking at the top a little bit about your current project and what you are really lit up about now. So you're writing your next book now. Would you please tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. So the next book is called One More Day, and it's actually a positive psychology informed guide for suicide prevention, which sounds deep, and it is. And It's honestly, Terri, one of the most inspiring, energizing, joy-filled things that I have ever worked on. And I never thought that I would be a positive psychologist with a cute, happy book like this, who is now so focused on suicide. It seems like it's a dark topic, but actually it's something that there's so much research and so much opportunity for us to support each other within, that it feels like it's a very important, timely message that gets to be shared now.
Yeah, especially now. Because I would say my own awareness, of course, as a psychotherapist for 25 years, I have awareness about how, that suicide is out there and is happening. But there's been an uptick in suicide, actual people actually taking their lives, but also ideations, wanting to commit suicide. And it is such, really, we have such a need for an accessible book, because people are always asking me online, what do I do if I think, so I want to ask you, what was your motivation, or what inspired you to have this be your next topic? Because you are going to be diving deep in this for a long time.
Yeah, and it's been on my heart for probably about 5 years now. So 3 of my best friends actually took their own lives back in my hometown of Newcastle. And there's a phenomenon in positive psychology in life called emotional contagion, which is where we can catch a vibe, we can catch a smile from someone walking down the street, and we see the positive ripple effect of well-being. There's also, on the other side of it, something that's called suicide contagion. And actually, when we witness suicide, it becomes more normalized. So this suicidal behavior becomes more accessible. And we saw this sequence of suicides that were happening in our friendship group. And probably one of the most poignant moments or conversations I had was my friend and I had just got into my car at my friend's ceremony and service, and we were both in tears, and we're like, I love you so much, friendship is so important, we're going to miss him so much, we have to make a pact that this will never happen again, we can't lose another friend. And within the next 3 years, she had taken her own life too.
Oh my God.
It's something that has been brought closer and closer into my personal awareness, to the point where I decided, this is here for a reason. So, Niyc, you've got to listen up. So I started to research, and I started to read, and I started to dig deep into the field to see what was out there. And one of the things that I've learned is that there's a body of work that recognizes that suicide is a behavior. And when we recognize it as a behavior, we see that behaviors can be changed. So I really want to, like, I'm not the suicide researcher. I'm the positive psychologist that's gathering the suicide research and connecting these areas together. And I really want for people to feel capable and feel like they have a toolkit, whether they're using it for themselves. So the book is One More Day. It's how can you get through one more day? It's what you can do for yourself if you feel like you are suffering or struggling. It's also one more day for those people who are what we call gatekeepers, like you or I, or someone who's a friend who has the opportunity to have a healing conversation with someone or give someone a tool that just might mean that they're able to be here one more day.
Wow. Okay. So this is amazing. What about if people listening or watching this on YouTube, if they have someone in their life who says something like, it would just be better if I wasn't here? What actions, what words, what advice would you have for someone who is afraid that someone that they love is suicidal?
One of the things that we've seen that is very simple and that really works is talking. So it's not dismissing somebody's feelings or not making the assumption that they're not serious. It's actually connecting and saying, like, tell me more about how you feel. And I hear you and I'm here with you and you are supported. And what we found through the research as well is that realigning with hope is something that is very important and very impactful as well. So, and I know I have actually had suicidal thoughts and behaviors 4 times in my life. And I think it's been interesting for me to meet so many people in my life who have been there as well, but also to meet so many people that have never had that thought cross their mind. It's very intriguing for me that as a human race, we're so split in our experience within our psychology. So realigning with hope and being able to just see, even if it's not the full light at the end of the tunnel, something to look forward to, or something that you can get excited about. And maybe it's just a tiny little chink of light. But what I find through my own experience is being able to have something to grab hold of can really, really help.
Okay, so from a therapeutic point of view, if I'm talking to a client and they were to say something like, I wish it wasn't here, I would say, are you in danger of harming yourself? They would say no. And I would say, are you sure? Do you have any plan? Is this a thought or like a plan, right? Because there, at least from the way that my training was, and, you know, there's a difference. Does that still hold true in what you're seeing with positive psychology and with this whole epidemic of suicide?
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's very important from a duty of care and ethics perspective that the go-to is always like, if in doubt, you must refer out. And positive psychology and positive psychologists are not the people who are dealing with saving lives in that moment. And it's interesting. I learned from a really young age. My grandmother was a phone volunteer for a charity in the UK called the Samaritans. So I grew up with her telling me, like, Nick, I was speaking to this person who was on a bridge and who was going to take their own life. And I was talking to him, and then the police got there and then were able to save his life. So I was aware of the power of that person being there in the process with them at that time. And as positive psychologists and positive psychology coaches, that is not our work to do. So we always recommend hotlines, referring out, getting professional support and help. And within the book as well, that's in there. So I'm very clear that prevention is my space. So positive psychology tools can help us before we get there, and they can help support us support each other before we get there. But in crisis situations, we've got to be responsible, and we've got to make sure that we're reaching out to the organizations that are really trained and have those tools and resources.
Right. What it sounds like, though, Nick, is that this book is going to be for everyone. It's for all of us, because no one, even as a therapist, right, no one has this locked down. And it's not like saying that one book is going to lock it down either, but with having phrases, with having a line of inquiry, with providing hope, as you said before, at least you know to do something and not ignore, and not, because I think a lot of times, at least people who've written into me, people have this fear that if they pursue the conversation, they'll be pushing the person towards ending their life rather than potentially pulling them away from that action.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that fear of not knowing, that or the subject even being taboo. And it's been very energizing for me personally to be able to have these conversations that we're having today and then be received so well. And I've definitely seen a shift through the last few years with the pandemic and mental wellness becoming a priority for so many people, because now they were out of the hustle of the 9 to 5 grind and they were in the house, and we actually had to listen to how we were feeling. We couldn't just continue to keep pushing on and pushing on and pushing on. So I feel like that's been a real positive that's come through the pandemic, so that we are able to recognize in the mainstream now that mental health is important. We've also seen that the incidence of suicides and the incidence of mental illness being reported has increased. So it's almost like the pandemic has created this other serious issue that we now get to tackle because it has really come to the front.
It has, and it's unavoidable. There, like Malcolm Gladwell's work, it's like you hit a tipping point where there's our ability to ignore, because this collective, I agree with you on the pandemic being, I saw so much within my own practice and with the groups I run and all the things that I do, of this collective pause button being pushed by the universe, not really by us. We weren't like, oh yeah, I'll stay in my house for a year or two. Like nobody necessarily was volunteering to do that. But the things that we used, busyness, as you said, the 9 to 5 grind, the being out of the house, you don't realize until you don't have those buffers that perhaps, at least with many of my clients, the state of their relationships, the state of their happiness, their internal experience, it's so much easier to have busyness and being overloaded and so exhausted. As my mentor David G says, you wake up, burn through the day, drop, and get up and do it all over again. That we were much less able to do that, because what I witnessed was that the regular defense mechanisms that we use in life of socialization, and even though these are also, many of these things, healthy things, but they're buffers between us and our own intimate feelings, our own actual feelings. Like you could avoid feeling them forever. And many of my clients, sort of had selective addiction issues during the pandemic, where they were really not alcoholics or really not addicted to pot or THC or whatever. But I definitely saw across the board an increase in use. Sometimes it was because of boredom, but a lot of times it was because of despair, the situation that they found themselves in, and feeling like they didn't know how to deal with it. Have you seen, what did you see during the pandemic?
Yeah, and I think it's the coping mechanisms. So how are we coached, or how are we conditioned to cope? And substances are a coping mechanism a lot of the time. So I feel like with positive psychology and through the work that you're doing, it's about how can we actually get the tools into the hands of the people that need them the most in a way that feels familiar. And you used the word accessible earlier on, and I think that's such a powerful word. When you said that, it literally gave me chills all down my body, because access And someone being able to pick up a book's a great example. Everyone knows what a book is. Being able to open something up and use something and feel a shift within themselves is so, so important. So I think it's an education piece. I also think it's a experience and an embodiment and an integration into life piece as well. So it's not just the conceptual of people knowing that they should work with a therapist or they should have a go-to coping strategy, but they're actually using it and they know that this is the easiest thing to reach for in that moment when they feel like they are finding things tough.
Yep. I think there's something very interesting about what you do for a living, how incredibly successful you've been in your many endeavors that you have, and writing books, and you've got a positive psychology training type thing. You do lots and lots of stuff, Niyc, and yet it's so, I think, hopeful for others to hear that you have struggled at different points in your life with feeling suicidal. So if any of those moments, can you think about what is it that pivoted you towards the not actually taking that action? Was there an intervention? Was there something someone else did that helped you?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something that's really interesting to reflect on. So I remember one time when I was in my 20s, I'm 35 now, and I was actually raped when I was 25, and going through the healing from that, and it was 2 years later, so it's called rape trauma syndrome. It's a form of PTSD. And I remember having flashbacks and nightmares and feeling like I was pinned to my bed because I was so, so terrified. And it was in those moments where I didn't want to continue because it felt so hard and so painful. And for me, the tool that I reached to in that time was a guided meditation. So I'm always thinking about what's the easiest thing in that moment. And it was really having the courage to reach for my phone and put on an angel cleanse and clear meditation that just started to help me feel a little bit safer within myself in those moments. And it was the really, really, really simple basic steps that helped.
Right.
I think when I've been there again and in maybe more recent times, so I experienced suicidal thoughts when I was very, very young, when I was 11 or 12. And that was because I got bullied really badly. And it was like I didn't know how to move through that experience. Then I had when I was 25 and healing from being sexually assaulted. Then in the last 5 years, I've experienced it twice. And it was very different more recently. I think because I had built so many psychological, emotional, and spiritual resources over time, which meant that I had greater access to those tools within myself. So when I went there in myself, it was because of a health issue. So I was experiencing mold poisoning and it was very, very overwhelming. And it felt like I had this fog all of the time that I couldn't get through the day. So I knew that it was hard, but I also knew that I'd been through hard things before. So for me, the message that this too shall pass and what I'm experiencing right now is temporary and I'm going to feel better at some point. It's having that trust in the process that there will be a brighter day. And that feels like it's helped me just take the next simple step. We've also gathered some data from other people who've experienced suicidal thoughts and who have gone on to survive and thrive. And one of the interesting things that came through all of that, the surveys that I did, was the presence of an animal. So I wasn't expecting that. And it came through so many times, horses or dogs or somebody who's in a crisis situation that doesn't want to be here anymore. And then their cat brushes past their arm and they have a sensory experience that brings them back. And they're like, whoa, this feels good. And this dog is unconditionally loving. So that was a really beautiful understanding to learn about as well.
So it's so interesting to see what actually moves the needle, because it's only really through the data that we know what is helpful. But what I'm hoping that our conversation, we're going to talk about other things too, but this is just so, I find it fascinating. And like you, so, it's something you can really get behind because it is so much like being of service. There is such a profound need for people to themselves, if they're feeling suicidal, have a resource that they can open that book and go, okay, here are some steps I can take. This might help. But also for those who love people or sense, whether it's a friend, whether it's a sister, that they're having that experience, that have something that you feel like you can say. Because here's the thing, if anyone listening or anyone watching, first of all, look at what we're talking about. You are not alone. Even if you feel this way right now, this is not a failing. This is not a weakness. This is not there is nothing wrong with you. We live in a hard ass world. Just living can be really hard. Never mind thriving and, being successful and having successful businesses or careers. All of that stuff is just gravy on top of living a life that feels good and that is fulfilling. So I love that we're having this conversation, Nick, because I know it's going to touch someone who needs to be touched right now in life. And that if you save, and you already have, I'm sure, but imagine just one person, but then imagine millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people, that this information can really create something different I think the conversation itself is so profoundly important because the more we talk about it, the less stigma there'll be. Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about language. And I don't know if you were caught up in the language of it, but I've been reading, about how people will say, instead of saying someone killed themselves, to say that they died by suicide. Does any of those, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think that does, from what I've learned, is to do with this energy of suicide contagion. There is a need for mindfulness around the way that we communicate about suicidal behavior. And you'll notice when things are reported in the media, it's often not shared that was someone who died by suicide, because they don't want to glorify it or make it something that does have this additional effect. So I think that there is a duty of care and mindfulness. And for me, as well as being a psychologist, I'm also a marketer and copywriter. So I'm always conscious of the power of our words to create, or on the opposite side, to actually destroy. So we have to be so mindful of what it is, the energy that we're putting out into the world, and how we are always able to influence through the words that we share and speak.
It's so incredibly true. I always say, someone said this to me decades ago, words have wings.
Ooh, I love that.
Right? And you're like,
you just give me a chapter title.
Use it. Feel free. I didn't make it up. A friend many decades ago said it to me, but I've said it many times since because it is so true. It's the same way. And not to get into manifesting, but there's a reality that what we think, the way that we frame what we think, and of course, this is what positive psychology really is all about, right? It's about frame. There's a million other parts of it, but that the frame is very important, right? Like this didn't happen, or this didn't happen yet. Right? Just adding that on the end changes the whole energy around that kind of a conversation. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is, releasing negative thought patterns, because this can be a real problem for folks ruminating negatively, negative self-talk. So what is your number one way that you help clients or people that you teach to release negative thought patterns?
I love this conversation. So just like when I was experiencing that terror and I reached for the meditation, I'm always conscious of what is the easiest next step. So rather than someone going into a full-scale positive psychology intervention, for me, my gateway is actually music. So I really like to shift by reaching for some music that changes my mood, first of all, and then step into a more detailed process or practice. So one of the really easy things for me to reach for now is name it, claim it, and choose to move through it. So if I notice that I'm having this looping thinking, I dig into, okay, what is the worry or the fear, or what is it that's really wanting to be heard and felt here? Because it's not often the initial thought. So I name it. I actually get clear on what it is, first of all, and I acknowledge that I'm feeling this. So I acknowledge that that emotion is there. And it's a common misconception of positive psychology that positive psychology is just about being happy all of the time, or just about thinking positive thoughts. It's not. It's like we want to recognize the emotion that's in there and really honor it and understand that there's so much growth and gold within the challenges that we experience as well. And then I would go to, so name it, claim it, and then choose to move through it. So I'd look at what part of this experience or situation or feeling am I not in control of? And how can I let that go? So it might be through breath work and really processing the emotion. I love to do shamanic shaking. So I literally stand, like shake my whole body and use sound to move the emotion through and do that releasing piece. And then what can I control? Is there an action step that I can take? And an action step might actually be you doing a morning ritual, or it might be you practicing a tool, rather than anything that involves necessarily trying to control anyone else. So I think it's having a go-to process that's simple and easy to reach for that can help us practically within our days.
Oh, I love all of that so much. What do you think about being proactive? Like, what do you think about, like, what is your, let's say your daily self-care routine? Can you share a little bit of what are the things that you do? Because I know you do stuff.
Absolutely. And I'm laughing because yesterday I was writing a post for social media and I said, you know, if someone looked into my life, you'd probably think that I was a professional candle lighter or a professional sound bowl player, because my tools are so integrated in my day-to-day that it's a non-negotiable for me. And I'm always in the question of, what do I need right now? What is it I need to feel right now in order to, if it's from a business perspective, open me up to new levels of creativity or being able to write the book? But also, how can I nourish and nurture myself? And I put my hand on my chest like this because this is nurturing and nourishing for me. This is a self-care practice, touch and just feeling where you need to feel that for yourself. Hot baths. I have an infrared mat that I love to lay on.
Me too.
It's amazing, right?
So is it a biomat?
Yeah, it's biomat. So it's got the amethyst and the...
Oh my God.
So good. And just having those simple practices that, for me, I used to be very, very structured. I used to be the girl that woke up at 5:30, went to the gym, came back, sat at a desk, did a morning ritual, like all these things in order. Now I'm like more in the dance of like, what is the thing that I want to feel right now? Or like, I have this beautiful flower that sits and I can look at, and just these little nurturing elements, fragrances, scents, sensations, as well as visualizations and all the things. I think it's not one thing.
Same. Just so very many things. But what's amazing is when you have a plethora of those tools in your toolbox and creating space. I always think that creating space in my morning, I don't do anything tech until after 11 a.m. Eastern time. Because when I get up, jump on my trampoline, meditate, have coffee with my husband, go see my chickens and my geese, like have actual real life. And for me, that is self-nurturing, to not deprive, right? And coming up with, but like when I was younger, I was exactly as you described it. I was super rigid about going to the gym because then it was about the size of my ass and really not about my internal experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I always say life is a ritual. And when you get to experience life as a ritual, you really do get to experience the joy in everything.
Yes. All right. I'm going to ask you a question about boundaries before we go, but I also want to ask you, when is your book coming out?
It won't be until 2023. And that's mainly because of the time it takes to ship, print and ship. But yeah, 2023.
Yeah. Well, I'm super pumped for when that does happen. I'm sure we'll have many more conversations before then. Yeah. Here's my question. Personally, what has been your most challenging boundary struggle and how did you overcome it if you have?
I love this question, and very vulnerably and honestly, I was in a relationship where I wasn't able to sleep because we had a compatibility thing where I need to go to bed at a certain time and he would snore or stay awake late. So for me, it was actually recognizing and understanding and learning to ask for what I need and also to take it. So a big boundary that I implemented when I was in that relationship was actually sleeping in separate bedrooms. And I fought for so long to try and force him to sleep the way that I did. But actually what I really needed to do for myself was take control and me take the step to create this gorgeous sanctuary in another bedroom and have this place where I had the best sleeps ever. So that was a big one for me because it really started a trajectory of looking after myself in a whole different way and having a new normal for what it meant to be in personal peace.
Wow, that's so beautiful to be able to do it. And it's so interesting how the universe always finds this way of like dropping these situations. So it's like, well, you can rise to it or you can never sleep again. Like, yeah. You know, you got to a point, it sounds like, where you were like, I have to do something because I have to sleep. But that's amazing that you actually executed that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Tell everyone where we can find you.
So my favorite place to hang out is on Instagram. I love a voice note with my dodgy Geordie accent from the northeast of England. And we have the website, which is unstoppablesuccess.com as well.
Well, it was such a pleasure. I'm so grateful that you spent so much time with us today. And I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you for doing what you do. We cannot wait for your book to come out.
Thank you.